Welcome everyone to Fruits of the Orchard. We begin tonight with Parshat Shelach Lecha. This is the Parsha of the 12 spies that were sent to Israel to search out the land and come back with a report. And we all know what happened. 10 of the spies came back they began with a positive report. But at the end, their conclusion was, we can't go to Israel. The people are too strong for us. They eat up their the inhabitants will eat us up. We were like grasshoppers in their eyes, and we can't go. What led to us wandering in the desert for 40 years. We're going to be dealing with just one aspect of this whole story. It's a very complicated story, actually. On Shabbat, we had a whole hour class on just trying to understand the simple understanding of whose idea was it to send the spies? Why were they sent? What's the story here? But what we're going to be concentrating on tonight is, as Moshe is sending the spies, he adds a yud to Hosheah's name, and it became Yehoshua. And it says that when names the 12 spies, so it says Hosheah bin Nun. And then it says that Moshe added a yud to his name. And we're told, Rashi tells us, Moshe added a yud to his name because the word Hosheah comes from the word salvation. By adding a yud to his name, then the first two letters of his name were actually name of God, a yud and a hey. So then you could read his name as God will save you. Well, what would he be saved from? The bad advice of the other 10 spies. That's the simple story. Yet anyone who has been reading the Chumash up to now knows that he's been called Yehoshua the whole time. So how do we understand that here all of a sudden he's called Hosheah, and Moshe adds a yud to his name? So one of the explanations is something we've discussed many times, is there's no before and after in the Torah. Is that actually Moshe changed his name long ago, but it's only mentioned here because it fits into the storyline. That's one way of understanding, because it is a contradiction, because he's already been called Yehoshua throughout the Torah. Connected to this is that it was Yehoshua who was sent by Moshe to lead the battle against Amalek. When we came out of Egypt, even before Har Sinai, we fought with Amalek. And it was Yehoshua who led the battle. So already Yehoshua needed God's protection. So we could understand that as there's ein mukdam v'muchar b'Torah. There's no before and after in the Torah. But the question is, what does adding the letter yud mean here? So we already said that by adding a yud, the first two letters will become yud and hey, which means that he is going to be protected by God, or Moshe's praying or changing his name so that it will now represent this idea that God will protect him. So there's a tradition that's brought down. Where did this yud come from? So one of the answers is when Sarai's name was changed to Sarah. So her name was Shin Resh Yud, and as it were, God took a yud from her name and replaced it with a hey. Just like Avraham, his name was changed from Avram to Avraham by adding the letter hey. Sarai's name was also changed, and she got a hey. But the difference was Avram did not have a letter taken away, whereas she did. And here, this yud from Sarai's name is now given to Yehoshua. So there's a very, very interesting perspective here, is that usually, especially when we look at God's name, a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey. So we're told that the masculine letters of God's name, again, we're talking in human terms, is the yud and the vav. And the two heys are the feminine letters. So one of the explanations in Kabbalah and Chassidut is that we know that part of the name change from Sarai to Sarah was that she would be able to give birth. So the fact that she had a yud in her name, and yud being a so to speak, a masculine letter or representing a masculine energy, she needed the letter hey. She needed this feminine element added to her name in order that she would be able to give birth. We know that a name change represents a fundamental, complete change in a person's whole personality, their whole character, their whole being. So Sarai, who was somewhat masculine, needed the letter hey. Now with Yehoshua, he did not get a letter taken away, but his name began with a hey, which is a relatively feminine aspect. And by adding the yud, Moshe was praying that he would be injected with a more masculine type of energy. Now, this is a very, very deep understanding here, but we know that in the end, Yehoshua has both. He has a yud and a hey. And this is actually true of every person, even with Sarai, who has a yud taken away from her name and a hey added. Every male has a predominantly masculine perspective, aspect, characteristic, but also has a feminine. And every female has both a feminine aspect and a male aspect. So here we see something very important. I'm not going to get into this for reasons that might be obvious, but this idea that every male has a feminine part and every female has a masculine part is a natural thing, because we know Adam, the first human being, was created male and female together. It was only once they were separated that we have the idea of separate male and female bodies. But we're told that originally Adam, the first human being, was a composite of male and female. And that is true to this day. Every human being still has that same composite. Now, according to many understandings, we're in the 6th millennium now, and we're in the 783rd year of the 6th millennium, meaning we're getting very, very close to the 7th millennium, which by tradition, if it doesn't happen before, we're hoping it happens before, will be the Messianic era. And we're told that if you take 12 hours of a day and you take 1,000 years of a millennium, so right now we're in the 9th hour of the 6th day. And we're told that in the 9th hour of the 6th day is when Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And without going into it in depth, we're told through many midrashim that part of eating of the tree of good and evil, there was a lot of sexuality going on in the whole story between the snake and Chava, between Adam and Chava. You have this shadowy figure called Lilith. It quite complicated, but it's brought down that there were sexual innuendos connected to eating from the Eitz Hadat Tov Ra. So right now we're in the 9th hour. And again, without commenting on it in depth, I think everyone will understand what I'm talking about. In the world now, there is, I would call it almost mass identity confusion between gender. It's like this big subject now is gender identification, switching sexual roles, everything that's associated with it. And many people explain that it's connected to the 9th hour of the 6th day. That's what we're in. We're in 5783. We're in the 9th hour. And so this is the challenge that we're seeing everywhere. This is the energy that's being manifest everywhere. But here we see in these stories is that Sarah needed a more feminine aspect for her to be able to give birth. And Yehoshua needed a more of a masculine energy to be able to be strong and eventually take over from Moshe and lead Israel into Eretz Yisrael. Now, of course, we're not talking about sex change here. We're not talking about gender change, but we all have both of these aspects, and it's represented by adding one of the perspectives, at least, of adding a yud to Yehoshua's name has to do with this whole idea. Now, very quickly, I want to take this a little bit farther because in this parsha, the letter yud and the number 10 appears over and over again. It's not just in Yehoshua's name. First of all, we see that there were 12 spies sent. 10 of them came back with an evil report. And later, God calls these 10 an evil congregation. An evil congregation. And because of that terminology, we're told that one of the reasons that specifically men are encouraged to daven in a minyan, a quorum of 10, is to fix two things, is to fix the sin of the spies, that these 10 got together and caused such terrible problems that we had to wander for 40 years in the desert. And another group of 10 were the 10 brothers that ended up selling Yosef. Binyamin was at home, Yosef was in the pit. So there were 10 other brothers involved one way or another in the selling of Yosef. So we're told that here's 2 times in history where a group of 10 men got together and created havoc. And that a minyan, a quorum of 10, is a fixing for it. And we're actually told that when the spies came back, the women didn't want to listen to them. They didn't listen to them. They didn't believe them. They trusted that God had promised to bring us into Eretz Yisrael, and that is exactly what would happen. So that's another appearance. Yud, of course, equals 10. Then we see when Moshe is praying for forgiveness for the people. And this in itself is an amazing thing that we can understand about Moshe, that when the spies came back and they convinced everyone that we could not go into Eretz Yisrael. So the people said, let's pick other leaders and let's go back to Egypt. And it says that Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces. Now here the people are actually threatening to stone them. And yet Moshe defends them. And we can't take this for granted. This is like Moshe is being threatened here physically, and his whole role as leader being taken away by the same people that he turns around and defends before God, and God listens to him. As part of his pleading to God, just one second. So he says, and now may the strength of my God be magnified, as you have spoken, saying, God, slow to anger, abundant in kindness, forgiver of iniquity and purposeful sin. So in this verse, in other words, here Moshe is bringing up most of the 13 midot of rachamim that God taught Moshe, that when you need compassion, this is the formula. And so Moshe is reminding God that we need compassion now. The people need compassion. But when you look in the verse where it says, and now may the strength of God be magnified. So the word for magnified is yagdil. And the yud is a large yud in the Torah. It's a large yud. And we know that large letters don't occur that often. So here you have another letter yud in the parsha. And of course, yud equals 10. So now we have the yud of Yeshua's name. We have the yud of Moshe's prayer that God's compassion should be magnified. We have the 10 spies. And we also have a verse where God, it seems, is complaining to Moshe and says, the people have tested me 10 times. 10 times the people have tested me, meaning how much patience can I have? Now, obviously, the Torah is talking in human terms, and we're associating human characteristics to God. But nonetheless, this is what it says in the Torah, that God says to Moshe, the people have tested me 10 times. So again, you have the number 10. And one of the explanations given over, and for those who are following our new series, Living with the Times, one of them this week will be on this particular point, is we have another place in Jewish tradition about 10 tests. These are the 10 tests that God tested Abraham, and he passed all of these tests of faith. So one of the understandings is not only, and I'm not minimizing, that God listened to Moshe's pleas, but we can understand that what gave God the patience and the forbearance to not totally want to get rid of the people, even though they tested him 10 times, is because Avram passed 10 tests. So it's like an antidote, that for every test that Avram passed, it gave God, as it were, strength to put up with the people when they tested him. So here again, we see another Yud and another 10. Now, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the name of the parsha is Shelach Lecha, means send. And we know that, especially in Chabad, the word for messenger is a shaliach. A shaliach. And this is the term that's used for the approximately 4,000 Chabad couples, really 8,000 people, but 4,000 couples that are all over the world with Chabad institutions, and they're called shlichim, shliach. So the Rebbe, in a known statement, said that the gematria of shliach is 348. And he said, if you add the 10 powers of the soul to a shaliach, it equals 358, which is Mashiach. In other words, Mashiach is the ultimate shaliach. It almost rhymes. Mashiach is the ultimate shaliach. He's God's messenger to bring redemption to the world. Just like Moshe at the burning bush, God made Moshe his shaliach to take the people out of Egypt. And that's how the Rebbe empowered thousands and thousands and thousands of people to go all over the world spreading Torah. So he said that adding a Yud, which means the 10 powers of the soul, to a messenger gives them incredible power. But what is this Yud? So this is what the Baal Shem Tov taught, that we all have a spark of Mashiach in us. Every person has a spark of Mashiach that needs to be developed. And Rav Ginsburg teaches that when enough individuals manifest and activate their personal individual spark of Mashiach, it will create a critical mass of redemptive energy, which will draw the Mashiach into the world. It's a very, very fundamental, cardinal idea from Rav Ginsburg. And this has really come from the Baal Shem Tov. It's not just that we have a spark of Mashiach, but then it becomes our task, our duty to arouse that spark. And that spark really is a spark of leadership. When it gets down to it, if you want to identify what is the spark of Mashiach that we have, it means a spark of Mashiach that we can take the light of Torah, the light of God, and spread it in the world. And that's exactly what the Lubavitcher Rebbe did by sending all these shaliachs out to the four corners of the world to spread the light of Torah, the light of Yiddishkeit, the light of God, to the whole world. So this is a beautiful way to take one letter and follow it through this parsha. And again, this letter has a numerical value of 10. So the letter Yud and the number 10 runs through this whole parsha. It ties it all together. So we should be blessed to awaken our own spark of Mashiach, which means the power to spread the light of God to the whole world. May it be so.